Chapter 6. Why do all civilizations build their biggest temples to their biggest gods? Have you ever noticed that all civilizations build temples, shrines, and houses of worship? You know, the premises that I want to work this chapter from is that all civilizations, ancient and modern, build their biggest temples to their biggest gods. You know, Egypt has the great pyramids of the pharaohs, and the Mayans had a temple that was 300 feet tall, and in Sri Lanka, India, there's a Buddhist monastery there, a half dome, kind of a temple that took 93 million bricks to build. Medieval Europe is full of Gothic cathedrals, you know, a light on a hill of the Christian faith. The temple of Olympian Zeus in Athens took 638 years to complete, and there are huge ornate temples all over China, Japan, the Middle East, all built as sacred houses of worship, or as unto the gods, as one might say. What do our biggest and most elaborate buildings say about us? Well, in the words of Jesus, wherever a man's treasure is, there will his heart be also. So I think our biggest and our most elaborate buildings and temples and structures, I think they say a lot about us. You know, have you ever thought about the biggest and most expensive buildings in America? You know, why are they here and why were they built? And what do they say about us? What do they reflect about our values and our culture? Well, money is the god of the American dream. You know, it's our idol, and I think it fuels the passion for about everything that we do. You know, the old cliche, love makes the world go round, but money greases the wheel. You know, we all build temples in America, but we just don't call them temples anymore. Now we call them banks. We call them financial institutions. And I want to take a quick look at the American landscape to see if we can tell what our temples that we build in America, what do they say about us, and what do they reflect about us? Let's start at the beginning. You know, the tallest building in Des Moines, Iowa, you know, the state that I was raised in, Principal Financial Group Complex, insurance, mortgages, investing. Now, I want to give you to my definition of a bank. I would argue that anyone who takes, uses, or manages your money for the purpose of making money is a bank. Okay, so I would insist that, you know, mortgage companies, insurance companies, investment firms are all theoretically banks because they're using your money to make money. So that would be my definition of a bank. Okay, the two tallest buildings in Minneapolis, Minnesota, where I went to Bible college, the IDS Financial Tower, originally constructed as headquarters of Investors Diversified Services, now owned by Ameriprise Financial, all fancy names for a bank. Second biggest building in Minneapolis, Capella Tower, headquarters of First Bank System. The two tallest buildings in Los Angeles, U.S. Bank Tower and Aon Center, originally built as United California Bank. The two tallest buildings in Phoenix, Arizona, Chase Tower, a bank, and U.S. Bank Center. The two tallest buildings in Portland, Oregon, Wells Fargo Center, originally named the First National Bank Tower, then changed to Wells Fargo when it was bought out. The second one is U.S. Bancorp Tower. The two tallest buildings in Seattle, Washington, Columbia Center, formerly Bank of America Tower, and Washington Mutual Tower, a Wall Street bank. The two tallest buildings in Boston, Massachusetts, the John Hancock Tower Investment Company, life insurance, mutual funds, annuities, okay? The second biggest building in Boston, the Prudential Tower, owned by Boston Properties, a self-managed real estate investment trust. The two tallest buildings in New York City, One World Trade Center, an international investment bank, and Bank of America Tower. The tallest buildings in Dallas, Texas, Bank of America Plaza, Renaissance Tower, originally First International Bank Shares Tower. The tallest building in Ohio, two tallest buildings in Ohio, Kettering Tower, originally the headquarters of Winners Bank and the Key Bank Tower. The two tallest buildings in Little Rock, Arkansas, Metropolitan National Bank and Regions Bank. The two tallest buildings in Omaha, First National Bank Tower and Woodman of America, life insurance, annuities, mutual funds, college savings, okay? The two tallest buildings in Houston, Texas, J.P. Morgan Chase Tower, investing in commercial banking, and Wells Fargo Plaza. Two tallest buildings in Atlanta, Georgia, Bank of America Plaza and SunTrust Plaza, the headquarters for Atlanta's World Trade Center. Two tallest buildings in Alabama, RSA Tower, Retirement Systems of Alabama, and the United States financial holding company headquartered in Birmingham, Alabama, called the BBVA Tower, $65 billion in assets. The two tallest buildings in Little Rock, Arkansas, Metropolitan National Bank Tower and Regions Bank. The two tallest buildings in Boise, Idaho, Zion's Bank Building, U.S. Bank Plaza. The tallest building in Cheyenne, Wyoming, U.S. Bank Building. The tallest building in Honolulu, Hawaii is the world headquarters for First Hawaiian Bank. The tallest building in Louisville, Kentucky is Washington Mutual, a credit card company. The tallest building in North Carolina, Bank of America Corporate Center. Tallest building in Rhode Island, Bank of America Building. Tallest building in Wisconsin, U.S. Bank Center. Tallest building in New Mexico, Bank of Albuquerque Tower. And the tallest building in Kansas, One Epic Center, which houses several banking and loan corporations. Now, one last thing here for the states that did not make the list. With banks, okay, the tallest buildings were cable and internet providers, gambling casinos, law firms, oil companies, government agencies, and five-star hotels. Go figure. Wow, I'm sure you can see where we're going with this. Let me restate my original premises. All civilizations, ancient and modern, build their biggest temples to their biggest gods. Now, you know, money is the god of the American dream. It's kind of what fuels our passion and everything that we do. You know, Baal, the god of the Canaanites in the Bible, was a bronze bull, just like the 7,300-pound bull we have on Wall Street. No connection, I'm sure. We still build temples in America, but we call them financial institutions because it's what we worship, it's where we worship, it's how we worship. And success in the marketplace is what has captured our hearts, and money has become the lover of our souls. And remember, it was Jesus who warned us and his disciples that the love of money is the root of all evil. Now, admittedly, to one man, money represents power, to another security, to another success, and to another influence, and to another privacy. But we all get our purpose in life from something, and that's what we build our temples to. You see, to some people, money is energy. It's what lights them up. And for some people, they get as much of a kick out of saving that dollar as I get out of spending it. Odd, I know, but that's their choice. You know, our temples reflect our values and our deepest convictions, and our temples are an interweaving of our past, our present, and our future. And they represent how we see God and how we see others and how we want others to even see us. And I think, too, a temple is also kind of a guarantee to us personally that we will never be forgotten when we were gone. You see, at least that's the lie we choose to believe, so we build temples unto ourselves, so when we're gone, people will remember us. Now, let me say this, too, that not all temples are bad, okay? Not all temples are bad. If I had an unlimited supply of money, you know, what would I do? What would I build? Everybody would build something. Well, I have several friends all over the world, missionaries that have built, you know, orphanages and Bible colleges and, you know, houses for unwed mothers, et cetera, all over the planet. And I would contend that those are sacred temples, okay? Those are things that you can go to bed at night and be proud of. And when we stand before God, God will show us what our temple is. You know, it's what we dreamed about, it's what we lost sleep over, it's what we spent our extra time working on, it's what we spent our extra money on. You know, but did the temple that I built in my lifetime, did it serve me or did it serve the world around me? You know, for some it will be an overdone business venture because it was all about us. And for others it will be an empty shell. I know I was lazy. But for a few of us it'll be our greatest moment. It might have been built by us, but it was never about us, and God knew that from the beginning. And that is when we hear the words, "Well done, thou good and faithful servant." You know, when I do a graveside service, I always mention the biblical teaching that we bring nothing into this world and we will take nothing with us when we leave. It's all about what we leave behind. And our temple is what we leave behind in this world. So if I could ask you to look over your shoulder today and look into the rearview mirror, what does your temple look like that you would leave behind if you left this world today? All civilizations, ancient and modern, build their biggest temples to their biggest gods. Well, let me read you how King Solomon violated this. It says, and I quote here, that Solomon accumulated 1,400 chariots and 12,000 horses. Solomon's horses were imported from Egypt and from Ku, and they imported a chariot from Egypt for 600 shekels of silver and a horse for 150. And they also exported them to all the kings of the Hittite and the Armenians. Now, do you see what's going on here? He not only accumulated a large number of horses, but he eventually starts an import-export business, selling horses and chariots to foreign nations to support his habit. Okay, the reason that God said a king was not to own a large number of horses is because he saw the future. When Solomon died and his kingdom split, most of those horses and those chariots were used against his sons and his daughters in battle. All those horses and chariots became a curse to the nation of Israel. And the very thing that Solomon used to empower himself during his lifetime destroyed the generation that followed him. You know, kings and politicians love to hand out government freebies because that's a great way to get a vote. But remember, the generation that follows always has to pay for that chain letter. Let me say it again. The very thing that Solomon used to empower himself in his lifetime destroyed the generation that followed him. Number 5. The fifth qualification for a king, quite honestly, is the king is not to be a playboy. God says right here, he is not to take many wives or his heart will be led astray. And again, going back to Solomon. As Solomon grew old, his wives turned his heart away after other gods, and his heart was not fully devoted to the Lord, and as the heart of his father David had been. And then there's another statement here. It says, King Solomon, however, loved many foreign women besides Pharaoh's daughter, Moabites and Ammonites and Edomites and Sidonians and Hittites. The guy had 700 wives and 300 concubines. How can a man lead when he's that distracted? You know, it's like the kid in Sunday school that said Solomon had 700 wives and 300 porcupines. I think that's honestly how the guy felt. But the main reason for that command was his heart would be led astray, and that is exactly what happened. See, this whole idea of being unequally yoked, and again, this has nothing to do with nationality. It has everything to do with belief system. But this whole idea of being unequally yoked, you know, Abraham took a foreign wife, a woman named Hagar. It was a mess. Esau married 2 foreign women, Judith and a woman named Basmath, both Hittites, and they were a source of grief to Isaac and Rebekah. And Ahab took a foreign wife, Jezebel. It was a mess. She was a Baal worshiper. In Ezra chapter 10, you see an entire nation repenting of marrying foreign women. And again, this has nothing to do with race. It's all about faith, conviction, and how we're going to raise our kids. A Jew and a Philistine do not share the same set of convictions on much of anything. Okay? The king is not to be a playboy. Number 6. The king is not to be concerned about souls. The king is to be concerned about souls and not money. I quote again, he must not accumulate large amounts of silver and gold. Okay? Now, the key phrase here is large amounts. God did not say that a king could not have any silver or any gold, but the issue was staying focused. And I want to show you again how this ties into King Solomon. You know, we touched on this earlier, but Solomon made silver and gold as common in Jerusalem as stones. Okay? Now, obviously, a king would not have an 8-to-5 job or run a business really while he was in office. So where would a king get a large amount of silver or gold if he was sitting in office? Well, there's only a few different places that he would get it. He would get it from taxation, obviously. Might get it from borrowing. Maybe confiscation of property, or maybe the plunder of war. But here's the point. The command is really not so much about money. It's about a king getting it the right way. This is all about integrity. You see, almost every week we see another politician who has fallen using his political clout to turn favors into cash, dirty deals behind closed doors, kickbacks for lifetime contracts. This command is really not about money. It's not about silver and gold. It's how the king is getting it. Look again at what the prophet Hosea has to say about an ungodly king. Listen to what he says about an ungodly king. He says, they make many promises, they take false oaths, they make agreements, and therefore lawsuits spring up like poisonous weeds in a plowed field. Think about that a minute. Hosea says they make lots of promises, false oaths, shady agreements. And what's the fruit of that? Well, lawsuits spring up like poisonous weeds in a freshly plowed field. You see, injustice is out of control, and the king is creating the soil conditions for this to flourish. Does that sound familiar? Number 7, a king must be a student of God's law. Again, I quote, he is to write for himself on a scroll a copy of this law taken from that of the Levitical priests. It is to be with him, and he is to read it all the days of his life, so that he may learn to revere the Lord his God and follow carefully all the words of this law and the decrees. I want to give you Dan's personal commentary on this. This is the way I would have written that Bible verse. He, the king, is to transcribe a copy of this command taken from the Torah and place it inside of his tunic right next to his heart and read it every morning when he gets out of bed. You see, Solomon should have had this pretty much memorized, you see? And there was something about the mechanics of writing this thing out with his own hand that made it that much more personal. You see, God wanted this to be a covenant agreement between him and a leader, not just coasting on someone else's faith. You know, we have a lot of well-intentioned Christians, too, that have tried to argue with me that a Christian should have no place in politics. What's interesting about that is that Moses makes no distinction between leading a nation spiritually, leading a nation politically, or leading a nation judicially, making sure that justice is administered properly. God did not commission Joseph to plant a church or to be an evangelist. He gave him favor in the sight of his commanders and officials. You know, the Bible proclaims Jesus Christ as prophet, priest, and king. Okay? Prophet, priest, and king. The spiritual, the judicial, and the political. You know, there's an interesting statement in the book of Jeremiah concerning the city of Babylon, and this is what God says to the prophet Jeremiah when he sends him there. He says, "But seek the welfare of the city where I have sent you into exile, and pray to the Lord on its behalf, for in its welfare you will find your welfare." God actually told the prophet Jeremiah, "I'm actually sending you there to straighten out a city." You know, what inspired William Wilberforce to abolish the slave trade was biblical conviction. And if the church doesn't stand up against evil, who will? Listen again to what the prophet Hosea had to say about an ungodly nation and how they perceive a true prophet. He says, because your sins are so many and your hostility is so great, the prophet is considered a fool and an inspired person a maniac. Simply put, the further a nation drifts from God, the crazier a prophet seems. So we don't look to the world to set our standard for what a good leader is. The Bible tells us what the standard of a good leader is. Number 8, a king is to have a servant's heart. And again, I quote, he is not to consider himself better than his brother. You know, I remember watching a documentary one time on the history of body language, and it was about what scientists call micro-expressions. You know, these little attitudes we barely pick up and barely recognize with the naked eye, but they come through. And they showed a politician that had been caught in a big lie, and he was up in front of the camera and making an apology, and they slowed the frames down, and you could see by the look on his face he was actually mad. It was a safe-face apology, but his heart was certainly not into this at all. And it was clear that he really considered himself better than the people that he had been called to lead, because why does a man of my caliber have to apologize to a bunch of commoners like you? But see, this is the dark side of being called to leadership. See, there's a natural inclination to assume that because I'm over someone in authority that I am now better than that person. And Jesus made it very clear that the greatest among you will be a servant of all. See, leaders are actually public servants. They are not overlords. Matter of fact, going back to poor old King Solomon, listen to the statement that God made about Solomon. So the Lord said to Solomon, since this is your attitude, and you have not kept my covenants and my decrees, which I commanded you, I will most certainly tear the kingdom away from you and give it to one of your subordinates. God kicked Solomon out of leadership because of his attitude. I've always told my kids that a privilege that you abuse is a privilege that you will lose. The ninth qualification for a king is a king must never turn from the law of Moses to the right or the left. Basically, do not add or subtract to the law of God. It would, one of the things I was thinking about as I was writing this book is it would be hard to quantify how the course of human history has been damaged because of corrupt judges, lawyers, and politicians. You know, there are a few things that will destroy a society quicker than an unjust legal system. And if you think that's a small matter to God, you have forgotten that the 5 books of Moses, the Torah, was the law of the land. And the Torah was not just a Sunday school lesson. It was a moral, ethical, legal blueprint for society that was to be governed by God. And it covered everything, you know, the Big 10 thou shalt nots, to personal hygiene, to property rights, to rules for a biblical divorce, you know, to a recipe on how to make holy anointing oil. It's all in there. And again, the law of Moses made no distinction between governing a nation morally, spiritually, or ethically. You know, if you take one leg out of a three-legged table, you immediately lose all stability. You know, how do you separate morality from theology, and how do you separate ethics from righteousness, and how do you separate any of this from governing with justice? You know, one of the things that has kept me flying straight all these years is knowing that someday I will give an account of my ethical conduct and how I used my authority to make decisions as I pastored a church. You know, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, right? God said, you asked for freedom, I gave it to you. He said, you asked for your own nation, I gave it to you. You asked for a king, I gave it to you. But if you want to keep it, here's the laws, then you have to obey them. God said, these are my qualifications for a king.